Hello and welcome to another in our special Oscars edition of our podcast, Conversations with Sound Artists. I'm thrilled to be back at Skywalker Ranch. This is Ren Klyce with the Dolby Institute and the SoundWorks Collection. And today we're talking with the team on Star Wars The Last Jedi. I'm thrilled to be at the table with some old friends of mine, Mr. Ren Klyce, Mr. Matthew Wood, Mr. Michael Semanick.
Pleasure to see you again.
Welcome to the show, guys.
Hey, Glenn.
Congratulations on your nominations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, Matt, I want to start with you.
Okay.
Tell us a little bit about your history with, at Skywalker Sound, and you've been doing Star Wars for a long time now.
Yeah, I started out here when I was 17. I was a video games tester, and then I worked on the Sound Droid development team. That was a project that George was putting together that he wanted to use on the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles as sort of a test bed because he wanted to do more Star Wars movies. And so then I worked on those. We remastered episodes 4, 5, and 6, put those out in the theater again, and then Blu-ray and DVDs of those. And then we did the prequels, and so I supervised all those. And then I was lucky enough to be asked back on by Kathy Kennedy to do the new ones. And so I had a history with J.J. Abrams, and I did his films.
Because you had done Star Trek.
Yeah. I had done. I helped Ben Bird on the first Star Trek, and I did the second Star Trek, and then we did Super 8 together. And and then in the meantime, I was doing the Rebels TV series and the Clone Wars TV series, sort of keeping the Star Wars fire burning. And now we've got this great thing where we can bring in new designers into Star Wars and inject some lifeblood into it. And I just try to, talk about what's come before and just have a sort of a meta look at it all, because it's all, someone could put in a DVD of Clone Wars, they could put in one of the original films, a prequel, one of our new films, and we just kind of want parity across all those genres, and
that all kind of sits in the same universe.
Yeah, that's kind of what we're trying to do, and I try to bring that to the table while giving a wide berth to amazing new sound designers like Ren Klyce over here.
Well, so that's a good segue to Ren Klyce. So this is your first time working in the Star Wars universe.
Yes.
So how did this come up? And so the director Rian Johnson hired you, or how did the team come together?
I came on JJ introduced me, and I came on pretty early, and then it was like the question was who we were going to have sound design it, and I think Ryan consulted with some of his past sound mentors. Like I think he talked to Gary Rydstrom, and Ren was first on the list there, and Kathy also had a history with you.
Well, I think Gary was, first on the list, and then I think he had a conflict because I think he was doing Ready Player One.
Oh yeah, uh-huh.
And another Spielberg film, which it was
he was doing The Post.
The Post,
right?
So he was busy, and but I had a history with Kathy through David Fincher, working on Curious Case of Benjamin Button. So I actually got to know her pretty well on that film, and I think David at one point, David Fincher was actually speaking with Kathy about possibly being part of the Star Wars universe, and there was a time when that was sort of on the table, and so I think my name got brought up then, and then David actually, I think, likes to take credit for suggesting Rian Johnson to Kathy.
Is that right?
Yeah, and I think if David says he did, then I would believe him, but we're all huge fans of Looper,
right?
Which is just phenomenal. And David had seen it and just couldn't believe it, and was actually speaking with Ryan about working on the Netflix series that he was developing, and so they were actually getting to know one another.
What that became House of Cards?
It was. I don't remember if it was House of Cards or Mindhunter or which one it ended up being. It might have actually been Mindhunter. And anyway, they didn't work out. But then when things with Kathy and schedules and David, and somehow there was a discussion where David said, "You really have to talk to this Rian Johnson filmmaker. He's amazing. You should watch Looper. He's a genius." So. That's the story that David told me, and it seems accurate.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
So, Ren, you brought up David Fincher, and that's how I got to know you. Before I got to Skywalker, when I was at Propaganda, and we worked on the game together
With Michael.
With Michael, that's right.
That's right.
That's right.
Years ago.
So, I think you're primarily known for working on David's films and being, his sound designer since the beginning of his film career. So, what was it like for you to step into the Star Wars universe where, everything is, this is a very different kind of language of storytelling than David Fincher's?
It was really intimidating, to be honest, but at the same time, really exciting because growing up around this area here in Marin County and being a kid watching Star Wars and knowing tangentially where they shot THX 1138 and all the backstories of American Graffiti and just being excited that somebody was making movies and how wonderful it was. It was exhilarating to get the chance to work on it. And it started actually with reading the script, and Matt and I both read it, and it's really fun how the security on these things is so insane. It's like you go to Lucasfilm, you have to check in, you have to show your ID, you have to get a badge, you go through these doors. It's like Get Smart and like these levels of security, and you go in, and then finally there was a person in their room. They had a safe, and they open up the safe, and inside the safe,
literally a physical safe.
It's a physical safe, and then it's like out of a Coen's Brothers movie. And then they pull out this tablet thing that's like an iPad that I've never seen before. It's like, what is this? And like passcodes, and they put you in a room with a security camera, and you read the script
with a security camera, so you can't take out your phone and do screen captures of the script. Right.
But the funny thing is, I said, "Can I take notes on my laptop?" And they're like, "Sure, you can," because you have to.
Sure.
You'd have to take notes. But and then from there, we both went to London.
So this was before they shot.
Yeah. We during pre-production, when they were already over in Pinewood, they've taken up Lucasfilm has a production office in Pinewood. That's where we've been doing all the films, and they invited Ren and I to go out there. And this is a great thing that Kathy extends to the Star Wars teams, and that's kind of something that George used to do. He let us go over to the sets and meet the model makers, the costume person, hold the guns, hold the weapons in our hands. We got to hold a porg in our hands and meet the creature shop folks, and so that you really get inspired by that. And they have the whole, they pitch you the film basically. They have the whole design scape and all the storyboards and the models and everything. So that's super energizing.
And the Millennium Falcon.
Yeah, that's right. We got to walk.
You get to walk on it. Yeah, you get to walk on the set. My God, how amazing is that? I presume it's not really useful for production, like for sound effects recording, But you were actually, Ren, you were the one who taught me about the value of recording Foley in the location or on the set. Because I remember I went down when you guys were doing Panic Room for David Fincher, that amazing set that he had built, and you would go onto the set of the house when the crew wasn't there, and you would record Foley on site so that it would match in with with the production tracks.
We did,
and that thought just popped in my head. I'm pretty sure you didn't do that on the Millennium Falcon, but
no, we didn't.
It's all wood. It's all wood creeks.
Sounds like cheap plywood.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was a great. The Panic Room was an unusual opportunity because Fincher had built this house with these incredible acoustics,
right?
And so and
the full facade and the street and the facade of the houses on the other side.
Wow.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but on Star Wars, even though the sets didn't have the same kind of what you would want them to be,
Space floor,
creaky plywood.
We did get the opportunity to hold things like the weapons, and that's actually, you can get a lot of good information from how heavy something is, or on the island where the temple island where all the creatures live, the fish. Mm-hmm. What do we call them?
Caretakers.
The caretakers.
The caretakers. Yeah.
And they have all this wind chimes made out of netting, and
right.
And you wouldn't normally possibly see those things with the footages if they just turned over a reel to you, but being able to be on set and see all those things that somebody has made gives you an idea as to their character, and that gives an idea to what the sound of the soundscape would be. So in that respect, it was really...
But it's also just great because, you're going to go over there and do this research trip, and it starts the brain percolating.
Totally. Yeah.
And then it'll still be some months before you actually get footage, right? But at least
Yeah.
you're thinking and conceptualizing that
Yeah.
whole time, which is great.
Yeah, the first things that came onto our front burner basically were things that were actually connected to toys, which was funny because all the toys that they want to put the sound effects into have a the production schedule.
The porgs had to get designed early on,
and that's nice because it does require some decisions to be made. It gets you thinking about things, and sometimes when you have a deadline, it kind of spurs more creativity in that way. But like a lot of the new items for the films, ship sounds and weapons and creatures, were like, we need to start figuring out about that now. So that was a lot of back and forth. The beginning was motivated by toys, but it was fine.
Yeah. That's not unusual in Star Wars universe. Yeah. And then, so Michael, what did you were re-recording mixer on the film. What was your job? Which piece of the territory did you have?
I handled all the sound effects
and
the Foley for the film.
So sound effects and Foley, and Ren, you mixed what on the
music?
You mixed music.
Yes.
Oh, that's interesting. I did, because when I just saw your name on the credits, I thought it was going to be the opposite. I thought you would probably, Michael, have mixed the music and Ren you the sound effects. How did that? So what? You guys have obviously worked together for a very long time.
Yeah.
Michael, you've mixed a lot of the David Fincher movies.
Yes.
With Ren. So how did you guys decide to divvy it up that way?
Well, I think, Ren's always been involved in music and the overall of the soundtrack, and even through all the Fincher movies, he's always involved with the composers and talking to them and working with them, and so this just seemed like a natural fit. I mean, why don't you just take the faders? I mean, he went to the scoring dates, and and the score is intricate, but it wasn't massive amount of tracks. I mean, John just doesn't do that kind of stuff, but it was, take it over. I mean, it was a good blending, and it just seems a natural fit, with David and Ren and myself just on the board. That just seems like a natural fit, and it works really well.
And Dave Parker mixed the dialogue.
Yeah.
Yes, that's what I mean, David Parker.
Yeah. It was funny being in a lot of these movies. I think historically we've never had the sound designer mix the music. I think that moment where it was Sean Murphy. Was a big proponent of you mixing the music, and then we went to the scoring session. It was the first time we were going to meet John Williams on the show, and Ren and John Williams hit it off so wonderfully. And John Williams is such a sweet and humble man, and he just really, I think that there was no question after those meetings that Ren was going to do that. But I think historically, like, the thought of like Ben Burtt mixing the music never would have happened. So this is a totally different situation. That just worked out great, I thought, because on one end, Ren, made the sound effects. It's his track. So to give that over to another expert to have his ear on it and mix that, I thought nothing became too precious. Nothing became like, oh, we can't change that. It's something I made. So it was a very open feeling in the mix. And and to see Ren working there with Ramiro, who's John Williams' music editor, they had a great rapport too. So that was lovely to see that.
What was it? Yeah, Ren, what was it like working with John? Because John, as Matt mentions, John Williams is he's a very genteel, sweet, humble guy, but he's also very protective of his music. So how did you establish that rapport with him, and how did that process go?
Well, Sean Murphy and I are good friends and have known each other for quite some time, and Sean, who really deserves a lot of credit for the sound of the music of this film, really, he was the first to champion me to mix the music, and that because we had worked on other films where he was the scoring mixer. In fact, and then Michael Semanick and I, we've been doing with David Parker this sort of hat trick, if you will, of switching roles for quite some time now, and we've really enjoyed it, right, Michael? I mean, it's been kind of it's been fun to have Michael's instincts on the sound design, because his perspective is so good, and he has such a good way of looking at the material that might, as you said, Matt, might normally be too precious if someone like myself were to be holding on to it. But because Michael has it, he has a fresh take on it. And Rian Johnson said something really nice about you, Michael. I don't know if you heard that, but he said, we were talking about you the other day, and he was like, oh, Michael, he's a storyteller. And it's true. I mean, Michael knows how to tell a story with sound and knows how to sculpt things really nicely. So But back to your question about the music, I think that also because I love music so much, and it's really important to me. It's not something that I want to not have. It's the lifeblood force of the film, and particularly in Star Wars, it's a character. It's bigger than.
Well, I wanted to ask you about the sort of the rules of music in Star Wars, because it has a very specific kind of presence because of John's score historically, and I think, I mean, one of the things that I've always noticed about the Star Wars films is they're very score heavy. I mean, there's probably, if the movie's 125 minutes, there's probably 122 minutes of music. Yeah. So how did you guys do that dance between the two of you of balancing sound effects and score?
Well, you listen to the score without anything in it. When I'm looking at a scene, what's the scene about? What's the supporting elements of the scene? And so, for me, it's finding out what frequencies work with the score and finding out what really needs to come through. And again, it is storytelling. It's like, well, what's the most important thing in the scene? Why is the camera tracking in? Is the score should be coming up slightly? I should be fading out the background so that it draws the audience in more, or whatever it is. So for me, it's just listening to the music and hearing its intricate setup or its counterpoint and going, okay, well, I don't want to cloud that up, or what works here and what doesn't work here. When is it going out? When is it starting to fade down? I can come up and take it over, and it can hand off to me. So I'm always looking at that stuff and just weeding out, frequencies to help clarify the score, and not, because you can just keep throwing stuff on top of each other, and
sure.
The next thing you know, it's just a buildup of noise, and sometimes you can't follow what's going on. So for me, it's always trying to follow and clarify. And so if the score's got something really beautiful there and it's working, then it's like, well, I don't need to cloud it and be in the way. Let's get out of the way and put in the specific sound effects or specific things here and there, or clear the line for the dialogue. In other times when it's not working, it's like, well, maybe we drop a cue here, and then, what can I do to fill in? But, we have such a working relationship as I can throw comments out rudely, and they're just like, oh yeah, okay, well,
Hey, you're famous for that.
Yeah. But they throw punches right back, trust me. But sucker punches.
But it's listening
too.
to the music, and learning what John Williams has written and why. And, it's a crash course in his thinking. And so, as Michael was saying, absolutely listen to the music all by itself and try to get a sense of what story John Williams is telling and what he's supporting. Is he's supporting this character's insecurity, he's supporting that character's fear, and listening to the instrumentation and how it interacts then with the dialogue. And sometimes we'll bring in the dialogue, oh, I see, she says this, and then there's a call and response with the music. Oh, that seems precious. Let's make sure that stays. So a lot of it is just learning what he's written as quickly as possible, in the time that we have. Of course.
Did you have access to the music while you were doing sound design?
We did, and Joe Bond, who was our other music editor, who really also deserves a lot of credit because he sculpted the initial shape of the soundtrack with John's music from other films.
Oh, so you're talking about temp track?
Temp tracking, but then as John would write, and he was brought in very early. He had an entire year to write. In fact, I think that was one of the reasons why he agreed to do the film, is that he wanted to take his time and really, do his best work. And the producers, Ron Bergman and Kathy, were smart enough to kind of go, that's a great idea. Let's give John enough time and to work his at a good pace, so he's not feeling rushed and he's not and he's enjoying it. I think enjoying the job is important to him. So Joe Bond would shape it, and then the cues they would record for way ahead of time, and the cues would come in and they would slowly be swapped out.
So it wasn't a typical thing where they were recording cues like
at the end
while you're pre-mixing and things show up. But he was doing scoring sessions during
Months and months.
and so that stuff would come in to you,
Absolutely.
and you would have that to work against on your sound design.
The Fathiers chase, for example. I mean, and that sequence, by the way, used to be a really long sequence that was slowly edited down. And, you see how the composer will work so hard to make this 6.5, 7 minute opus, and then by the time it's done, it's 2.5 minutes, know, so a lot of it gets thrown out. But, so we had that material, and as Michael was pointing out, frequencies and the geological shape of, well, what's high, what's low, what's mid, what can we get rid of? Oh, we've got a rumble there, and John Williams is doing something low. Let's get rid of the sound effects to let the other one speak.
Yeah, and I had the score for pre-dubbing, most of it.
Mm-hmm. So you could just solo the music and say, okay, well,
I had it there so I could learn it as we were pre-dubbing
Right.
sound effects and seeing what's working right in and out of there. And even when we didn't have it there, I had temp track that was actually really good. So
which is just super smart, because then you're not going to waste a lot of time finessing something that's not going to work.
In the final. Yeah, you're not. You spend the time in the final just creating or finessing things right down to the end, or where Ryan, wants to try something different, experimenting, Well, it's working this way, but let's try this now. Instead of spending all your time, that's not working, that's not working, that's not working, that's not, what about this, what about, throwing everything in there. So, it was very, very helpful.
Tell me about the mix process on the film. So I presume it's a Star Wars film. You don't have, you're not having to go do a bunch of studio test screenings with test audiences, right?
We had a couple of screenings, but it was all done. All the temp screenings were done out of the Avid. Bob Doucet and his assistant Sam Bollinger have an ear for sound, and they were definitely our ally on this film.
Were you feeding effects tracks to them?
Oh yeah.
They had all the crash down music mixes, and then they also had all the effects coming in from Ren, and so there wasn't a lot of surprises when we got to the final where something was completely different. And so we did all of those mixes right out of the Avid. They had a little screening room hooked right into their media composer in their cutting room, and they would bring executives in and people into screen. But it was a fluid process. We never had one. Everyone
had
has
like
to do
a traditional temp mix,
No,
where everything stops and you do that for a week or two.
We haven't done that on Star Wars ever. I mean, really. I mean,
well,
even
when George was making the films,
we didn't have to,
right?
Yeah, we didn't have to. But even on the new ones, I mean, we would do all the mixes out of the Avid. In fact, I'm about to leave right after this interview to go to do the same thing on Han Solo. We're going to go do a temp mix out of the Avid.
Yeah,
but
don't go.
But that's
I know.
But that's great too, because I think there's a lot of heartache and woe when a director gets Avid love, and
right.
gets used to stuff that then you're replacing in the pre-dubs in the final.
Try to get them most of our stuff as early as possible. And there was some great stuff that Sam and Bob did that we kept a few things here and there that really worked well.
We should talk about those guys a little bit, because Bob is also a lover of sound, and the picture editor really is the first sculptor of the sound, and he understands the beats and the rhythms and the whys of why that sound is there at that frame, is because we have to wait a beat so that then they go, oh, they're talking about something over here or over there. And so he was very helpful to us, particularly in that crate sequence. Remember, Michael, when we were at the Salt Planet and all of that.
The crate sequence?
There's a planet called Crate, which is it's a red planet covered with white.
Where the final
salt.
battle happens.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
And that was a really tricky area for Michael and David to mix, for all of us to mix, because it was loud music and then soft dialogue, and loud sound effects and soft dialogue, and that sort of thing. And so Bob had shaped it in his Avid roughly, but the rhythms and the reasons why things were there, he understood. Mm-hmm. And so he really guided us, with Ryan, of course, too. But he really helped us a lot through that.
Mm-hmm. There's some sequences I want to ask you guys about.
Yeah.
And probably most famously, I think when people have been talking about the sound for this film, everybody focuses on the silent moment.
Mm-hmm.
That's not silent.
That's not silent.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's just
plural.
not the sound effect you think you're going to hear.
That's correct. Yeah.
So, of course, we're talking about the sequence where Vice Admiral Holdo makes the jump to hyperspace through the Star Destroyer.
Yeah.
So I saw the film. I was at a press screening before it was released at Dolby headquarters in San Francisco. And then I saw it opening weekend with a paying crowd because I'm a Star Wars geek like everybody else. And both times, like, the audience gasped. There was an audible reaction from, which is awesome.
It happened at the premiere too.
Did
We were all just waiting, and then
It was
Yeah,
amazing.
I did.
it was,
It kept
all
going.
over. Yes, it was amazing.
And so it was this wonderful kind of
reaction,
amazing that then I heard like AMC was or a theater chain was putting up
Couple
signs
of them did. I saw them. Yeah,
because people were complaining about it. Like
it was intentional. Yeah.
So we'll get to that in a second, but just back up because it's really an amazing sequence. So how did that kind of come together? Was that part of conceptually? Was that part of the sound design for that sequence from the very beginning? Was that a discovery in post production? How did that sequence come together?
It came together in the cutting room, and when we saw a really early cut, there was a rough version of it with it being quiet already in place.
The picture
that Bob and Ryan had arrived at. The shape was different, but it was very much the idea that once we get to this one sequence, let's go quiet. And so they're the ones that came up with that wonderful idea. We shaped it and changed based on their original architecture, but they came up with the architecture of that.
Yeah, it was always. I never saw it. It was always designed that way from the beginning that I know of. Yeah.
Well, you bring up the right. You also, Michael, bring up the point that it's not a silent scene. So what's acoustically what is happening during?
Well, what happens there is the music peaks. The whole track is peaking at that point. It peaks. Everything doesn't go dead. The music finishes. It rings out. As the ring out of the music comes, there's a low space tone that comes in, and I don't know.
And that's when she makes the jump through.
Well, she's making the
Yeah.
Wow. There's a low tone in there. You don't hear. I mean, because it's not. Again, you're not expecting it. The gasps of the audience and people's reactions are just they're floored away. Like all of a sudden. I mean, even I did a screening up in Seattle with Microsoft, with 600 Microsoft, and the gasp went. They couldn't believe it. And these were all Star Wars. I mean, full on gamer. Guys who 600 employees got to go to see this. Paul Allen set up a thing for them and one guy in the middle of that sequence just screamed out, "Yeah!"
It's amazing.
And then the whole place did. But what I noticed, even at the premiere in that sequence, is, and it was always designed that way, but I never caught it before. Was for me, the audience becomes part of the soundtrack for me.
Right.
And it was like, wow, they are so into the film that now their reactions have just filled out the track. And it feels silent there, but it's because people are reacting to it so much. I mean, there's other scenes in the movie where we actually take sound completely out.
I wanted to ask you about that because I was making notes when I watched the film again. There's even that really beautiful sequence right towards the beginning of the film when the bombers or last bombers coming in at the First Order. Dreadnought, and suddenly there are all these big wide shots, and then suddenly you see her eye, and the track completely collapses and goes really. And so the moments of quiet and the dynamic range in the track I think are just fantastic.
That right there is the result of having Rian Johnson, Ren, and new blood into Star Wars. I think those were such risky moments. And I felt like, we do that with Paige and Rose in the bombing run. We do that on all the Force connections. We do it right before they start the big lightsaber battle in Snoke's chamber. And obviously the Holdo sequence. And all those moments, we just really got intimate. And it was risky. I mean, even our producer, Ram, was like, I think it's too quiet. Yeah, it's too quiet.
It was too much, yeah.
Well, like, no, particular sequence, we do take the sound completely out in a couple Force Connect scenes, right?
Outside of a couple of footsteps.
But
and
nobody's
some breaths,
ever mentioned that.
Yeah.
Not a single word about that.
Is that right?
Yeah, not a single word.
I noticed it right away. I was like, I've never heard this kind of mention in a Star Wars film before.
Yeah. There's one track where it completely drops out.
Yeah, so the Force Connection scenes, how did you guys arrive at the treatment of sound in those sequences?
Ren has the original, how they got, but how we got it in the mix is different than how they designed it originally.
Well, that was when I had read the screenplay that Ryan wrote, actually. two big questions I had for him when I met him for the first time was, what are the force connection sequences going to sound like? And what's the mirror cave going to sound like? And his eyes lit up like, I like the fact that you're asking those questions. And we worked on those sequences for a long time. I came on early and started to manipulate the dialogue. And the dialogue actually is pretty much the original shape. We did go through a process of slowly replacing production with ADR because we wanted to clean breaths, and we wanted it, as we were learning and discovering the sequence, and Rian kept coming around to this notion of, I want it to feel like we're in a vacuum, he kept saying. And so there were the dialogue between the two characters and how you sort of hear Kylo Ren's voice approaching before he speaks.
Right.
That was a technique that, and a sound process that we
It's almost
arrived at.
it's almost like drum gating in a way.
Yeah, well, it's taking their dialogue. It was very simple. I took their dialogue, flipped it around backwards, added reverb, took that, flipped it around backwards, and then just sort of jigged it and did the same thing with delays and different types of reverb, and then blended those reverbs so they come to their voices. The one thing that I didn't quite nail until we were in the final, where Michael really helped sculpt, was the sense of the void. And I had made these sounds for Rian that were like, we're in the real world, and then as soon as we connect, there's sort of this feeling of stasis or dreamy texture. And we had that in for quite a long time, and finally Rian said, what if we just got rid of all of that completely? And so we did that. And then,
All my beautiful sound design.
Yeah, no, it's fine. But that's okay. And that's why it's great having Michael go, yeah, no problem. It's gone.
Let's see what we do, and let's be bold. You take it when the director says, why don't we try something? And that was the nice thing. He had been hearing this stuff and had lived with it, but it was like the hit moments when you're mixing where I want to try something different. Let's experiment a little bit. It worked for a long time, but I think we can get something better or different, that moves me better. And so, I think it was Ryan's idea about yanking all the sound out.
And so then we ultimately came up with a sound that was like, how do you get there? So we had a reversal sound there, and it cuts off. And just as it cuts off, then Michael pulls all the faders off, and it's
Pulls everything back.
Dead quiet.
I had stuff, going all
And
through
that was,
there.
we arrived at that, and we were like, wow, this is fun.
As soon as I did that, Ryan was like, that's it. That's great.
And our producer, Ron, was like, nope, we can't do that.
It's going to sound like a dropout.
That's weird.
It's going to sound.
That's not Star Wars.
And in fact, people did think the soundtrack was messed up in the film. Apparently, in certain theaters, which seems
but not
just
in that
crazy to me.
spot.
But not in that spot.
Not in the spots that he was thinking. Yeah, that's
so.
very
What's
interesting.
happening? What's happening in those Force Connect scenes? What's happening in the track? So there's the dialogue, and then is there just some tone or
nothing? When it first drops, when they first go, nothing. There was not even music in the first two. And then in the later ones, there's definitely music threading through there. But the first couple are just they're breathing.
It's gutsy.
A little bit of Foley.
But what it does is it for me as an audience member, it has the effect of putting you in there.
Oh that's what I think Rian was trying to get, this intimate connection between them two, the two of them, and just like really.
There's
draw
nothing
the
else for them. Like they're just
That's it. You're stuck, and they had to be connected. So. I don't know. That's the feeling I got from what he was trying to achieve.
General Leia's spacewalk. When I saw the sequence, I was like, "Ooh, this is interesting." This is kind of interesting, gutsy storytelling. And then, of course, I mean, for me, it just worked because there's the poignancy of Carrie Fisher having passed. But how did you guys? I mean, that's such just a nutso sequence. How did you guys approach it from a sound design and music perspective? Because there's a big score moment in that when she kind of reanimates and then starts flying back. It's very music driven.
Yeah, and it is music driven still. I mean, we added some more connection stuff.
That was the one thing that we actually, after we print mastered, we came back to. And Ryan we'd finished mixing, and he went off on his tour of promoting the film to to Japan and everywhere else. And so he would watch the film, and
Sure.
he started accruing this little notebook, of like, well, we should do this. And
This is before the film is released?
We got finished. This is the first time a Star Wars movie we've ever been finished with enough time to do something like that.
we were finished
We're normally-
months in advance.
We're normally finished like a week before like D-Day, so it's.
But you guys had actually mixed the film last summer, right? Or a few months
In the
before?
fall, towards the end of summer, fall, right?
Okay.
So he went off to promote it, and then he started, keeping a little notepad, and one moment that really kept coming back to him was Leia and the Force, and the moment that you're talking about. Mm-hmm. And so he wrote me and asked, what can we do to make it feel as if the Force is coming from within her? Mm. And that was a really good way of couching it, because what does that sound like? And so I ended up doing, I think, 7 versions of that moment.
Of the sound design of
and I would say, and we kicked around all sorts of ideas. One of them was the sequence that was voices that was from the Jedi text that Matt had a big part in. And we thought, maybe the text, the Jedi voices are coming, but then we realized that was an external sound.
Right.
It wasn't coming from inside her. So we ended up arriving at a sound that he was happy with. But it is, like Michael was saying, it is largely music with these sounds. And I ended up pitching these tones. If you listen there, you'll hear these sort of Force sounds that are in tune with John Williams' music, hopefully perfectly. But
the sound of the Force.
Yeah, the sound of the Force.
A lighter side sound of.
It's sort of a fluttering thing that's hopefully coming from inside of her, and it is that beautiful original Leia theme that, like, for me, you just start crying.
Yeah, it just brings tears to my eyes. Yeah. It was a question that I had for you, but I was just thinking about that sequence again.
It's so good.
Yeah.
It's really sad too that, and the irony of that scene is that everyone thinks that was planned.
Well, you think that's her death moment,
right?
The first time you watch the film,
right?
But
everything was done.
That's amazing.
And then she was coming back to work with Matt to do ADR, and she died on the plane. Yeah. It was awful.
Well, not exactly.
So it wasn't Matt's fault.
No, I did ADR with her.
I mean, she was coming back to LA though, right?
She was coming back from London, but those were 2 separate trips. But I did get 1 round of ADR in London.
I wanted to ask you about that. Was there, obviously, tremendously sad when she passed away during post-production. Did that cause problems for you guys in terms of her production tracks?
Her production, no. I mean, we had pretty much everything we needed to make it work. I did bring in a sound alike for a few syllables here and there, but nothing. It was just a few things when there was clothing rustle that we couldn't get an articulated, little syllable. But it was like maybe a handful of syllables basically, but everything else was Carrie. Yeah, and. I was happy to have that last session with her. I'd worked with her on the last film, and I'd known her socially from various events over the years. And
sure,
she was just the powerhouse and totally hilarious and incredibly amazing, positive energy.
There's a great documentary too about.
I was going to bring that up because I saw you're talking about the film that she made with her mom, with Debbie Reynolds. And
directed by Fisher Stevens.
Directed by her brother.
Well, actually, no. It's directed by Fisher Stevens and. Her brother's in it.
Right.
Yeah,
that's
but
right.
it's confusing because Fisher, the name sounds like they're related.
Right.
And Fisher's wife, Lexi.
Yeah. I was at the Telluride Film Festival where that film premiered, and she was there.
Oh, wow.
And she did a Q&A, but this was just like maybe a month or two.
Must have been really close. Yeah.
A month or two before she died. And she did a Q&A with, and of course, she brings her dog, Gary Fisher. Mm-hmm. With her,
Gary came to all the ADR,
and Gary had his own, the bull had his own chair.
Yeah.
At the Q&A session, she was just amazing.
Yeah.
She was just this kind of force of nature.
It's really sad
it's
because
very sad.
She had a lot more to give,
Yeah.
And she was so brilliant in her writing, her sense of humor. It's really sad that she's gone.
Yeah. Are there any other particular sequences that you guys are super proud of that you wanted to kind of acknowledge or talk about?
Well, I thought the mirror cave was always pretty interesting to me in the way Ren designed it, but no one ever wants to talk about that one either. But I will.
So what? But what is it about that specific sequence? I mean,
I
you're talking
just
about
like the way-
the creature design with the is that what we're talking about?
No, I'm talking when she's in the mirror cave.
When
and
Rey walks up to the...
Ray-
The mirror cave. Right.
Yeah,
It's that when she sees the sort
Yeah,
of
I
the
always
reflections
thought
of herself and the sound is coming
the
and going. at the
sound
same
is,
time.
traveling around the room, and
Yep.
Ren did some great jobs and very specific, sound orient. Every single footstep to every cloth movement to every little, even her breaths were like very detailed in there, and how it was all, and even on the sound design on the cave, and then how on the other side of the cave the different types of tones there are, on the other side of the mirror. Rian was very specific, and Ren had designed some great stuff in there, and then music and how it interweaved with the music. I always loved that sequence. So those were kind of sequences I thought were, was really wonderful, and they're quiet, but they're very detailed, and they're very, they have accents, very accented on it. But that's one of the sequences I enjoyed a lot.
Yeah.
That area.
Yeah, I think it's I think when I think Star Wars sound design, there's always going to be big battles and lots of, weaponry and lots of spaceships going on, but I don't normally think of them as being incredibly detailed, subtle,
it's beautiful,
specific tracks. And so I think this, it sits very comfortably in the Star Wars universe, but it has a very distinct, unique sound.
Oh, good.
Thanks to
And,
you.
and,
Thanks to you
and
guys.
Ryan had designed the movie to have dynamics in it. You can
Right.
tell just in its storytelling that it comes down.
Yep.
And then it takes off, and then it comes back down, and it takes off
Yeah.
again. So just in the way they edited the film and the storytelling, it lended itself to
He
these
gave you
moments.
guys room to do that stuff.
really
Yeah,
did,
he really did. And then he just re-emphasizing, hey, let's go a little bolder. Let's try a little bit, try a little bit quieter here or a little bit louder here. And again, sound is wonderful when it's quiet. You don't have to be as loud, yet it feels really loud sometimes. You know what I mean? It's a
of
weird
course.
event when things are quiet, and all of a sudden there's a big bang. It's like, wow. And it's really not that loud, but it just takes you by surprise. So
Yeah.
I think the film has a lot of those. It has a lot of wonderful dynamics in it, and that's pretty much just Ryan and Bob, building the movie that way from the beginning.
Right.
So
a lot of new stuff, but obviously it's a Star Wars film. There's lightsabers and there's, Chewbacca and there's R2 and, so many of the iconic elements that Ben Burtt designed and built in the original films. But I have to just kind of Star Wars fanboy geek out for a second. Like, are you still doing lightsaber sounds the old fashioned way? Like,
Right.
is there now a complete library of lightsaber sounds that you don't have to go back and do the crazy recordings anymore?
for me, that was a wonderful part of it, because so many of the art, the history of how those sounds were made and built, Ren paid absolute respect to, and a lot of them were redone. I mean, they had a fun mission in the scoring stage here, building those.
We, the sounds that Ben Burtt's made, they're so iconic and they're so adhered to the movie, you can't separate. You can't have
They're part of the
Chewbacca
universe.
without sound. You can't have R2-D2 without that image, the lightsaber. But there are a few opportunities where we needed to have more variety of those sounds because they were doing a lot more. Rey would do a lot more with her saber, and Kylo Ren and so forth. And so we came up with this notion of, well, let's reimagine the sounds and reconstruct them in a way that was from a similar starting point. And so Matt, who knows the sound library better than anybody, helped me find the original two sounds, which is the hum of the lightsaber. And one is it's a Sony Trinitron tube television with the microphone that Ben Burtt was walking across the room and he accidentally rubbed it and he heard it, and that's one sound. And the other is the sound of the idle of a 35 millimeter dubber kind of idling.
Yeah.
And those two sounds
Those together make up the steady state.
make up the steady. And then what Ben Burtt did is, as you can hear, is he then played that out of a speaker and then took a microphone like this one that we're speaking into and would swing it in front of that speaker. And so I thought, well, let's do that again. but let's do it with 192K recording and high-res recording equipment and Myers sound phase-adjusted subwoofer playback.
Sure.
And let's get the entire team to do it. And let's get every single person who's working on the movie to do their own. Let's get everybody in on it. And so we
Hopefully
had
with some margaritas, right?
I didn't get invited to that. I missed the margarita.
we didn't do the margaritas. Damn it, we should have.
Although people did fall over, I think. There were a couple of people falling over.
So we had a great time doing that.
I'll bet you did.
And then the other
And
side,
you did it here on the scoring stage? Oh,
we
that's
did,
fantastic.
and it was a lot of fun. The other sound was the igniting of the original lightsaber, of Luke's lightsaber, and again, Matt was really helpful to me finding these sounds, and it's sort of like when you get, for me, never being part of this before and getting to kind of open up the treasure chest to hear these sounds, it's quite something to go, oh.
And it's quite something to watch it through your eyes too, man. I gotta say, like, that was for me the joy of working on it, is seeing new people work on Star Wars, and like you get the cream of the crop of the crew. Everyone wants to do their best. It's like you feel like you're making a dent in something a lot bigger than what we normally work on. And John and Bonnie and
everybody worked really hard, and we had a great time. So
TIE fighters are still the same.
yeah,
it's still
The TIE fighter is still.
it's still that
You can't.
20th Century Fox elephant roar.
Is that what is the TIE fighter sound?
it's that. It's the 20. It's an elephant roar, and then it's also some of the TIE fighters have the sound of like wet tires on
Which
asphalt.
we decided to. We steered
little
away
bit.
from the wet tire.
But we stayed because that iconic sound, even when I was a kid, of that TIE fighter
Sure.
coming.
We always used to do the scream when on the playground, right?
Yeah,
With
it's
with
just
our
like
TIE
you
fighter
know
toys.
what's coming.
Sure.
So every time I was telling them to
yeah.
But
that
but
sound.
then you were able to do some variations, right? So Kylo
did.
Ren's TIE fighter has a
Yeah.
Yeah, so
slightly
that's a
unique sound.
different
Yes.
elephant. So you kind
It's a
of
different elephant.
It's one down at the zoo here. No,
it's not as good though. It's Ben picked the best one, So it was fun to reimagine those sounds. The sound of the lightsaber. There was this file called Mae West, and you're like, what? You think Mae West?
What? In the Star Wars library?
Yeah, and the naming, by the way.
Yeah.
Tim Nielsen, thank goodness, has gone through and like he's putting proper names, because it is like it's a foreign language, because to learn what something is, you have to call it by a completely different name that it was called 40 years ago, and only a handful of people know that.
Yeah.
So Mae West was another one of them, and so I was like, what is Mae West? And it's a life jacket that you put on, when you got on a Southwest flight, and and if you were to ignite that, there's a CO2 cartridge in both sections, and they open up, and that sound is the sound of a lightsaber turning on, believe it or not.
Really?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So we found, we went onto eBay or Amazon and got a bunch of these things and got cartridges, and again we got the entire crew involved, and everybody got to do their own version of the lightsaber.
Great. So 2 quick questions for you guys, because I know we're almost out of time. The film, it's going to be available in Dolby Atmos for home theater. So what sequences, for the people who have Dolby Atmos, what should they be listening for? Where are some interesting Atmos moments in the film?
there aren't any. No,
God.
It's mono. That's our whole
the whole
show.
film is,
mono.
we natively mixed it in
mixed
Dolby
natively.
Atmos.
Right.
So, gosh, I don't know. I'm using
Force
the whole
connection,
thing.
The Force connection sequences. I
Force
thought.
connections, yeah. There's all the battle sequences, stuff flying all over around you and over the top of you. There's, when the ship on Crete, when the ship comes flying in, off the stand when they're flying, there's so many different ones that I used that to the fullest. I used it all the way to as much as you could use it, I think.
Even in the music, when we're with Snoke in his red room, if you're to solo, you'll be able to hear the choir. That we put the choir up there.
And the overheads, yeah.
Yeah, gosh, it's very
It's a very,
specific.
very
thing.
Vincent Minnelli kind of set.
Yeah.
Snoke's
It's
chamber.
amazing. It's all burned down.
What do you mean it burned down?
Well, I mean, like in the movie.
Oh, okay, yeah, of course.
It's all the big red. And
by
everything.
Vice Admiral Holden.
Yes.
You guys are obviously nominated along with David Parker, who makes the dialogue,
Yes.
and also Stuart Wilson, who was the production sound mixer on the film. But it wasn't the five of you that just did this by yourselves. Who else on the crew would you like to take a moment to acknowledge?
Dialogue-wise, Richard Quinn was our dialogue soup, and I've worked with him on a lot of projects. He's done a lot of projects with Ren, and very meticulous, and he worked really well with Bob Doucet. So we had a lot of looping and a lot of loop group, and acquiring that all over the world. I have a little portable looping setup that we go and fly all over the world to hotel rooms to get actors when they're not available. But yeah, Rich Quinn, James Spencer, our first assistant, Koya Elliott.
Koya was amazing.
Yeah. Trey Turner, and then sound design assistant,
Steve Orlando. Who was, he's so technically skilled at recording, and now he's an amazing editor now, and beautiful recordings that we would do these high sample rates and slow them down. We had Bonnie Wild and John Borland as our sound effects editors, who worked their butts off on all these reels.
Yeah, John was my right-hand guy in the mix, so
he was incredible.
Bonnie was there a couple days because she had to go off onto something else, but yeah, John was the guy. Every time I'm turning around, what now? What now? He was a trooper, and
a huge Star Wars fan himself too.
Yeah,
so he knew all the stuff. Yeah,
he knows the language. I'd call him up and I'd go,
he went to bat really well.
Remember in Empire, John, when the I'd sing the sound.
Yeah,
I go, what's that thing called? I can't find it. He goes, Probot.
Yeah.
Type in Probot. I'm like, Probot? What the heck is Probot?
And then right there it is.
There it is.
Yeah, he knew. He was my right-hand guy there, right on the...
And Bonnie Wild, she mixes
there.
on, she mixed Rebels for us.
Oh, okay.
She's been doing a couple seasons of that.
And she's
amazing.
Cut these reels. John and Bonnie cut these reels and worked very diligently for weeks and weeks and weeks. And Bonnie had reel 7, which was that big crate reel. And then there was a rebalance where all of her work then went to the end of a reel that John had. So then he got to take credit for her stuff.
That's
and she's
hilarious.
like, she has this, John, you got to take my stuff. And then she had to inherit an empty reel that he was in. She was like, this is not fair.
Yeah.
But she her work was incredible.
Foley, Frank Ranella and his team.
Yeah, Margie
and Ronnie Brown
Yeah.
have done a lot of Star Wars projects with us. So they're kind of our renegade Foley team here at the ranch. They work in what's supposed to be our ADR room.
Is that right?
And then they do a lot of live kind of Foley all over the place. So in the building, they'll do stuff. And
That's great. What's the use of having a ranch like this if you can't run around and make sound
exactly? So I think we have 3 Foley stages here on the ranch.
And Ronnie, they and Frank really came up with this great. They know the language of the stormtroopers' outfits and
those suits,
and suits, and
they can't sound plastic, but they can't sound metal. They have to have some kind of.
Oh, that's interesting. That's the rule.
Yeah, well, it can't sound like what it looks like because why would they be wearing plastic? But it has to have this other high tech sort of feel to it, and they've definitely cultivated that over the years.
And then Kim Patrick, our editor,
she
was great because she would cut alts, which is when we needed an alt. We remember Michael. We were going through some of the we were listening to the Foley, and we needed to have give us some alts. And then we had
was it D?
D Selby.
Yeah.
D Selby, really?
D Selby.
Oh, that's great.
D is incredible, and he would not only go through and edit and create alts, but then he would do the thing that drives people like Michael nuts, where you hear these little ticks.
Yeah.
And it just drive everybody nuts. And he would
place them so
splice them out, or
carefully.
he would volume tuck. I mean, this man went through it with the finest
The patience of a
brush
saint.
Yeah, exactly.
and
Anyone that does Foley, definitely.
and saved us.
That's amazing.
We would have been pre-dubbing for days if he hadn't done that.
And our mix techs, our mixer assistant,
Stephen Urata, who ended up mixing in the end when Michael had to go to another, had to go to
for the
Coco.
last couple of reels.
Steve did.
Yeah, and he was
That's
great.
Michael. He's always juggling 12
He's
different
too
films at the same
popular.
time.
They just kept mixing.
We kept
Schedule
going.
kept
It was a very
going.
luxurious.
That's the story.
You can pick up that one on the Coco interview you do.
We can ask.
That's what happens when you start early on the mix. They can keep going.
Well, it's always a good idea.
Sure.
Yeah.
Guys, thank you so much for taking the
Thank
time to
you.
do this. It's been a blast being back at the ranch with you guys today. Ren, Matt, Michael, congratulations on the amazing work, and good luck at the Dolby Theater in a few weeks.
Can't wait.
Thank
And you guys, you're up for BAFTAs as well, right?
Yes,
Yes.
sir.
Yes,
So you're
that's
about to
right.
head off to? Are you going to go to London?
I
Okay.
think
Yes.
so. I haven't got an itinerary yet.
I don't have one either, but I think we're going. I hope so.
All right. Well, good luck at the BAFTAs and then at the Oscars, and thanks again for doing the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is Glenn Klyce signing off from Skywalker Ranch for the Dolby Institute and the SoundWorks Collection. Thank you.